And we did an interesting campaign with us in MTV where he went and actually said, I love having sex. And guess what? So does everybody. Otherwise, we wouldn't be a billion people. L'Oreal is a pioneering company, and I think people don't understand their genius is actually in massifying trends. It's very easy to create products, but very difficult to create amazing products. That actually comes with how well you train your people. I always say one thing to everyone, just go back to your formative years in life, which are always I would say, first 15 to 20 years of your life. What was your pattern of decision making? Did you pick the easy path or did you pick the uncomfortable path? I say this to women post-marriage, please love your career. Do not be apologetic for being ambitious. Be extremely ambitious when it comes to your own vision for your own self.
Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of The Barbershop. Today I have with me someone who everyone who knows her tells me that she's a brand expert, business expert, and I've been wanting to meet her for a long time. And whenever we do a barbershop episode with someone who I have not met before, typically I like to meet them directly on the episode so that you get a first-hand view. But she decided to meet me for half an hour before, and a large part of this episode actually got done behind the camera. So my biggest effort today with Sucleen is to make sure we repeat what we discussed behind closed doors. But welcome to the barbershop. Such a big admirer of everything that you have done. And just the half an hour with you before, just give me an insight into your energy, your ability to understand business, brands, and everything that your reputation that precedes you kind of told me about. But welcome to the barbershop and thank you for taking time.
Shantanu, such a big fan of what you've built. Like I said that to you, even inside, I think the beauty of your show is how quickly you're able to go behind from the business to the person. And I think those insights are invaluable for people who are watching your show. So more power to you. Keep doing this because I think you don't know which story might actually go out there and inspire someone. Yeah. And I think more and more stories need to be shared. Absolutely. And I think the more candid people are, the better it is for everyone.
100%. Because I think candor, being unafraid, sometimes being provocative, because our audiences, Sucleen, are younger people who are looking for inspiration, hungry for inspiration to actually go and do their own thing. It may be entrepreneurial, it may be something in sports, it may be, but they're very, fire in the eyes, hunger in the belly kind of people, right? And I think in this conversation, after this hour and a half, if even one of them decides to kind of take the plunge in whatever they want to do, I think we would have spent our time well this Saturday afternoon.
Indeed.
But we touched on a lot of topics from wanting to be entrepreneurial to a stellar career building brands in India and outside, across categories, across geographies, from ASM in UP at HUL to being in Paris with the world's most iconic beauty company, to coming to India and joining a rocket ship in a new age beauty company. You have a wealth of experience in building brands. Tell me, how has brand building evolved in your career of 20 plus years now? From the brands which, HUL had, you spoke about longevity, you spoke about distribution, but today we are seeing, for example, we spoke about quick commerce. How has brand building changed and how has it remained the same? I know it's a loaded question, but I want to kind of unlayer brand building in your head as you see it today.
No, I think, Shantanu, it's a great question, and I'll actually take the liberty to start with the latter. Or what hasn't changed? I think fundamentally, brands inspire trust. They stand for consistency. The very reason you go back and buy the same product over and over again is because it takes away the choice conundrum. You're certain that this is what I expect to see and this is what I will get. I think to that extent, what has not changed is that playbook of a hero product, which is gold standard in quality, which is consistent in any country where I find it, and will be the same every time I buy, right? So I think that doesn't change. The second thing which I think hasn't changed, and if you see all the new age brands as well, I think they're all aspiring for it, but brands are also built with time, right? I think I had the privilege of working on brands like Lakme or Dettol or even Harpic. They're all over 100 years, right? So when you've seen something over generations, the trust is here to stay because the brand lasted the test of time. Right. The second thing that hasn't changed is fundamentally why brands exist. So all the brands are inherently either solving for a desire because you aspire, or they're solving for a problem, which is a need, right? When you solve for any of these, the three questions which I think invariably every single business thinker who's designing consumer products is thinking of is it relevant for my consumer? Today, is my offering superior to what she's likely to find or he's likely to find on the shelf? And most importantly, in a country like ours, even more important is value. And value is not always the cheapest price or the highest discount. Value is to be able to give consumer that feeling that, wow, this was worth paying for.
Correct.
Right? And I think that hasn't changed. Although what has changed is the route to market. And that also brings with it its own set of challenges. In an era where I was working in HUL, distribution was our greatest moat. It would take you 1 year of testing, pre-testing, maybe even 2 years before you actually decided to launch or relaunch a product. So the sheer amount of time which a marketer would spend in perfecting the product, the concept, the pack, and testing it versus the database which always had competitors, right? Or even advertising, where you would put it in a clutter and test it against every ad that the consumer is likely to see today,
Correct.
right? So the whole emphasis on getting it right was massive. In today's day and age, and I think the way D2C has disrupted the ecosystem, that time window has really shrunk. So today that test market is actually happening live, and it's happening in an iterative manner. And I think that's where marketers, or that's where founders, if they continue to be super agile and humble enough to say that maybe we didn't get it right, let's go back and fix it, I think you will survive, or probably you will thrive. But I think the struggle is where you compromise on the product or you compromise on the insight. Consumers are very quick to rubbish what's better.
Yeah.
However, they will always pay the premium for what's superior or what's different. So that hasn't changed.
That's amazing. You spoke about something that your boss at Reckitt, when you moved there, said, which is, if you can create a profit pool on day one, then the brand or whatever you're building, the business will survive and thrive.
Correct.
I think that is something that, for example, at Bombay Shaving Company, we are now realizing 7-8 years in that we are up against a very mighty competitor.
Correct.
And it is very unlikely that in their sphere of excellence we will beat them. Can we be a worthy challenger? Yes. But can we use that worthy challenger to ladder up in other places where they are not present is our strategy. But realizing that we need to have a profit pool on day one is something that I think came to us 7 years too late. But talk a little bit about how that learning was there. And Adi Saigal from Reckitt was here. He spoke about the same thing with one of your favorite brands, Harpic. कि profit pool हम create करेंगे 30 साल तक और वैसे brand बनाएंगे. लेकिन वो thinking new age में मेरे को नहीं लगता इतनी है. But talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the new age business is very tough. So firstly, I must confess, last 2.5 years, if there's one thing I've walked away with, is a huge amount of respect and empathy for the hustle that a new age founder goes through. Just the sheer survival rate is so low.
Yeah.
So low that, we end up looking at the heroes around us and we assume that to be the norm. But it's absolutely not the norm.
Correct.
We just don't know so many faceless, nameless people who are trying every day. But it's incredibly hard. So I think first thing which I must say right at day one is that in this journey, I think the entrepreneurs in India have changed the fabric of this country. Today, kids don't come out of college aspiring to be CEOs.
Yeah.
They come out aspiring to be founders.
Correct.
And I think that is phenomenal, right? I would go back to the story I was sharing with you, Shantanu. I think in 2012, I came back from Hindustan Lever and I took up an assignment in Dettol where I was very privileged to be working with this gentleman called Mr. Chandramohan Sethi. Now, he was... So I had never, so I remember meeting him for my interview and asking him, so sir, what's my team? And he gave me a very kind look, like how a little child is asking for, give me more toys. And then he just looked at a phone and said, here you go, that's your phone. And that's your laptop. And here you go, that's your team. I said, all right, very interesting. Okay, a year down the line, I was expected to be launching a dishwash product for Dettol, which was expected to take over who was the market leader at that time, which was Vim, right? And clear moat was there that this was a dishwashing liquid that had 100x better the germ kill ability versus Vim, which was an ordinary cleaner. I mean, not ordinary, but a fantastic cleaner. But this was cleaner plus germ kill. As usual, I mean, today what you have as venture capitalists, typically in large MNCs, your senior vice presidents become the venture capitalists who young innovation managers go to and present their case, and then they expect to get funding.
To get budget for it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's how you basically get the money to advertise for the next 3 years. I still remember the first day I went to present to him, and he looked at me and he said, you're going to kill this company if this is the P&L. Where's the money? I said, sir, how will you make money on day one? He said, sorry, that's your problem to figure out. Because if you don't make money on day one, you're never going to see the side of money. And I think it really forces you to look at business differently. Of course, maybe first year you will take a hit, but you do need to look at inherently, is your gross margin the right profile? Is the AOV large enough? Are you then looking at all the sort of bundling opportunities that get people to pay more and do a pantry loading in so that your absolute value that you generate is higher? So your mind then gets wired towards looking at strategies which are inherently different from saying 3 साल बाद कमाएंगे, शायद 5 साल बाद कमाएंगे. Because with that mindset, आप कभी नहीं कमा पाते.
Correct.
You know, that 3, 5, 7-year horizon just keeps moving ahead.
Correct.
And I think that is one amazing learning that I never forgot. Because it was gold,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's not a mindset which today exists. Because, see, after 21, we all realized, Shantu, money became easy.
Yeah.
And that capital, at one level, built businesses, at some other level, also destroyed businesses,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes when you think with a frugality mindset, you just build differently,
Yeah.
right? Because the survival rate is so low.
Correct.
And I think to that regard, today there's a lot of correction that has happened, and for good reasons, right? I mean, today we are all talking about building sustainable businesses, profitable businesses. I think it all boils down to speed and time horizon. If I give you 10 years to build what your dream business is versus expecting you to build that in 24 months,
Yeah.
you just make all the different choices.
Correct.
So I think I have probably the deepest respect for founders who are building it slow and steady and are winning the race for the long term. And it's super difficult because the only person who has to make that choice and who's financially going to bear the consequence is the founder,
Correct.
right? So I think to that extent, it all boils down to the vision of that person,
Yeah.
right?
No, I agree. I think sometimes, the fundamental direction of the funder really plays on the minds of the founder. So as an innovation manager, if Mr. Sethi would have said, you can burn all this money, but I want to beat Vim and I want 20% share in 24 months, you would have done things very differently, but you would have...
Shantanu expected all of that while making money, right? Because it's a and philosophy, not a or philosophy. Go kill them, get 5% share, and show me money.
Yeah.
You know, so sometimes those impossible goals just make your mind get wired differently, right? You start thinking of basket size, AOV value,
Yeah.
how will you get repeats, how will you disrupt quickly? You don't have infinite money. So how do you first make sure that you can actually literally pay as you go?
Yeah.
You know, sell more so that you can generate the cash to reinvest. But you know, your mind then is doing all the problem solving for that goalpost in mind. I don't think today when any investors coming in, see initially when investors came in 21, and I'm only speaking of that because I think a lot of us saw a big boom at around that time. I think the operating question was how fast can you grow?
Yeah.
You know, we're investing in you versus a traditional company. You have to beat the growth rate 3x, 4x, 5x times, right? Suddenly then you became very attractive.
Correct.
Instead of actually saying, would you really even be in business 3 years from now
Yeah.
if you continued this way? So I think it's just about the questions we were asking then. And I think to be honest, there is no right or wrong.
Correct.
I think it's just an evolution. You know, we are also all maturing in the whole journey, like for all of us, right? It's just a learning journey.
No, absolutely. Sometimes I think you're right. I think companies die of indigestion of capital a lot more than they die of starvation. Frankly,
Correct.
I think indigestion of capital is an irreversible death knell. Starvation is something that you can kind of lean the company down and then you can kind of resurrect it in the
Correct.
future.
Correct.
Unless you really kind of
Correct.
go under.
Correct.
But I think 2021 created a lot of indigestion in the system.
Correct.
Some companies more than others. And I think also I'm seeing a lot of people who founded companies in 2021 back in the job market today. Because when you start a company in boom time, probably raise a seed round which is very overvalued. Then you have to grow into that valuation over 2-3 years and money
Correct.
becomes tough.
Correct.
And then you've not built the resilience yet.
Correct.
When you're born in good times, the resilience is not built. So suddenly you're like, this is not working out. So in the last 3-4 weeks, I've now seen 10 founder CVs. And I think entrepreneurs are great people to hire,
Absolutely.
but the ones who have built resilience, not the ones who have given up on it, right? So it's a tricky time in general for well-funded companies also, for badly funded, for early stage. Excess capital in general has more cons than benefits is my very slow realization. I've benefited from it, frankly. We raised a big round in 21. We kind of really were able to ride the COVID
Correct.
boom. But you spent...
But you know, Shantanu, for that time, that thinking was right. Because see, when you put yourself in the founder's shoes,
Yeah.
They were thinking of basically saying, can we conserve cash, have that much in the kitty? It takes the pressure off us.
Yeah.
So thinking at that time from their lens was also not wrong.
Raising is okay.
Raising is okay. It's how
Deploying poorly is a
deploying.
problem.
That's exactly.
See, when you raise at X, so your company is worth X.
Yeah.
You're raising at a valuation of 2x because you're
Correct.
getting it.
Correct,
Excess
correct,
liquidity gives you valuation.
Correct.
Now X से 2x में तुमको grow करना है.
Correct.
तो वो growth at any cost आनी चाहिए because you are
बिल्कुल.
behind.
बिल्कुल.
क्योंकि 2x से तुम्हारा मीटर चालू होता है ना, तो वहां तक तो पहुंचे.
बिल्कुल.
तो वहां तो कैसे ही पहुंच जाओ अभी. तो कुछ भी लॉन्च करो, कुछ भी मार्केटिंग करो, पैसे पड़े हुए तो कुछ भी डालो, and then suddenly it's not working out. And I think over like Deepak Garg is coming, he speaks very openly about this. He started a company called Remigo.
Remigo. Correct.
And he's like, boss, जहाँ पे मेरा कोर है वहाँ पे मैं फोकस नहीं करूँगा, जाके दुबई में लॉन्च करो, ये करो, वो. I did a lot, like he said it on the last podcast, and it resonated very deeply with me that I agree with you, and I see myself doing it often. Thankfully, I've not taken a lot of those calls which were very expensive, so we could absorb them, but many times companies can't,
True.
and it becomes very problematic.
But you know, I'll tell you, that's where I think for me, my greatest learning was in last 21 years, I often compared notes for myself. You know, like companies that built brands that lasted 100 years versus today, businesses that got built very quickly. I think another very big difference is that for larger organizations, they built a playbook and then they said, you know, now we know what's a repeatable model. We will keep repeating it, keep scaling it. We will deploy this model in another country when the market conditions are right, and we will give it the next 20 years. And that's how they built it slowly. I think that even before you did one category adjacency, there would be 200 board meetings to say, is it the right brand stretch? Now the difference is in an online industry, you need a portfolio. As a result, your hero product contribution becomes a decimal level.
Correct.
So then what do you stand for? So your brands get built, but there are no hero products.
Correct.
And consumers at the end of the day recommend products.
Correct.
They don't recommend brands unless they love the product.
Correct.
So I still remember my first brand assignment was on this brand called Nor Soups.
Huh.
So it
HUL.
was HUL. And Best Foods was perhaps HUL's biggest acquisition that they had done, and which made it the world's largest brand back in the day. And for India, it was still a small business.
Yeah.
But the way the senior leadership consistently took a call to say we will not enter a new category till soups becomes large enough. At least stand for one category before you enter the next category. And I still remember the launch of noodles was a boardroom discussion for years before it actually saw the light of the day.
Yeah.
And I think in hindsight, good thinking, because you can bring in the next pivot only when at least people identify you for one thing.
Correct.
Right? And I think that is really the biggest difference. Horizontal play versus depth of category.
Because new age companies, some of them get it right? So I think, for example, Viva. In the food space, I think Viva has gotten the portfolio approach
Absolutely bang on.
bang on.
Yeah, agree.
They're like, boss, I do sauces.
Yeah.
And I do them really well. And that's all I stand for. So then now they're able to sell a portfolio and
Correct.
they get distribution, product,
Correct.
pricing, they get the basics right. But if you look at like HUL or Nestle or Procter, they're like, boss, product. I look at Gillette, for example. I look up to that company like crazy. But the way they're focused on Guard and Mark III and then
Correct.
everything around it.
Correct.
कि I'm just going to ladder up my consumer. जिसको जो चाहिए उस प्राइस पे
वो मिलेगा.
उसको लगता है कि मैं Gillette यूज कर रहा हूँ.
That's true.
I love that about
Yeah.
even Maggie, for example.
Even L'Oreal, it's the same.
Yeah.
You know, like you literally go from, if you are a natural product seeker, then Garnier. If you are a person who's seeking products that make you stand out, say a L'Oreal, then you graduate to a Lancome, right? So they beautifully pivot from mass market to professional products to luxury.
And then Uber luxury.
And
होता
Uber
है.
luxury, right? So you end up extracting the maximum value as the consumer goes through his journey of aspire to affluent to self-actualized.
And वही I think new age brands like Viva or even Mamaearth. Mamaearth has such a stellar portfolio
agree.
approach.
I
He
agree.
spoke about
We just
Revant,
spoke about it, yeah.
right? Whether it's Man
Yeah,
Matters, Be Body.
correct.
Again, full assortment.
Correct.
कि बॉस दुकान में शेल्फ मेरी होगी. अब उसमें जो assortment है at different times for different consumers, कभी उपटन होगा, कभी कुछ होगा.
Correct.
Maybe 2-3 products might be consistent, but everything else is.
Yeah.
And I think on the street also, new product growth versus same SKU
Yeah.
growth is a question. Analysts
Yeah.
have. But I think Viva and Mamaearth and some of these guys are really showing that we can change the way, like how much of Maggie comes from noodles versus ketchup
Yeah.
is very different from Maggie brand manager to a
Correct.
Mamaearth brand
Correct,
manager,
correct,
for
correct,
example.
correct.
But talk about, you spent 8 years at HUL, then Reckitt, then L'Oreal in Paris, then back to Reckitt. You have, managed brands like Harpic, Dettol, At HUL, you spoke about Lakme.
Correct.
L'Oreal, of course, you were in the beauty space. And Good Glam, which is a very new age
correct.
makeup and beauty business. But talk a little bit about the best brand stories you experience, either first-hand or ringside view, in terms of growth, step change marketing that really worked, or some like innovative stuff that you think like you carry on as feathers in your cap.
Yeah, more than feathers, I think, in a journey of a founder or a journey of a professional, I think, stints you remember are the stints that actually make you believe that you can, and I think that's where failures are very important because they help you build resilience. And I think success is important for you to know that you have it in you to make it happen, because it takes a whole lot of resilience to get to the success. So I think the two anecdotes I'll share with you, Shantanu, one would be on Lakme and the other one would be on Harpic, because I think both those brands are actually very dear to my heart and for different reasons. So Lakme was really my first stint and it was an acquisition. So a brief
When was the
history.
acquisition?
So this was a brand that was acquired around the end of 2000s, and it was originally a brand born in 1952. Simone Tata actually created Lakme. The word Lakme actually comes from the word Lakshmi in French opera. So there's a French opera which is called Lakme, which means Lakshmi,
Okay.
right? And this was
Really?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it's quite fascinating. The brand actually has a stellar history. It was a brand that Simone Tata built when she'd gotten a directive from the government that you need to create an indigenous cosmetic brand, right, which can really cater to the new age India. And makeup, mind you, is a category which was at that point of time seen as a category which is for women who are fast, where probably kajal was normalized, but any kind of color on your face really showed you as a certain type of a woman.
Was it?
Really. And then slowly attitudes shifted. And I think if I go back in time, it was an acquisition for us where back in the day, HUL was still a company that took immense amount of pride in categories like atta, laundry, chai. So where the macho guys who are handling large commodities, big rakes of trucks are going and you're making, margin thinking was not so strong. It was much more about volumes and tons and growth. And, your acumen was judged on how big was your brand, like, तो 1500 crore का brand संभाल रहा है या 3000 crore का brand संभाल रहा है. But back in the day, I remember, Lakme was a very interesting brand, phenomenal profit profile.
How big was it when you guys bought it?
Sure, at that time, I think it was much smaller. I mean, I wouldn't ideally divulge numbers here for confidentiality reasons, but it was a brand that was probably a similar scale as yours.
Okay.
Back in the day when I was handling it. And, there was an immense opportunity to grow makeup. And although internally the business had a much stronger skincare business, so the thinking on ground was we understand skin better, so let's grow skin. So I think my first learning that came there was that there's an inherent tailwind which a brand has for what the consumers buy most often.
Correct.
Right? So if you are a brand that started as a lipstick brand, you may have pivoted into skin and the company that is acquired, you may have a specialization there. But inherently, the brand has a tailwind linked to where it started.
Correct.
Right? Second thing that we realized was even within
For our viewers,
Yeah.
HUL's skin portfolio at that time was Dove,
Fair and
Pond's,
Lovely.
Vaseline.
It was Pond's, Fair and Lovely. Fair and Lovely was a humongous brand. And those were the two formidable brands, right? Which was Pond's and Fair and Lovely.
Okay.
Then, of course, the portfolio grew later.
Okay.
That's the time when we said that, today if I look at people internally in office, we're not even gifting Lakme, right? Because it was perceived to be a mama's brand. And that is one of the challenges that happens for brands that have been there for generations.
Older.
And this is also the post-liberalization era, Shantanu, where L'Oreal had just come in.
Okay.
So your international competitors were very shiny. There was Maybelline of the world, suddenly very international, contemporary. And you had Lakme here, which was almost becoming a very indie brand.
Air India of the...
Correct. Correct. And that's when I think the first realization that dawned on me is that if you are the consumer, who are you trying to fool? If you're not gifting it, then who are you buying it for?
Correct.
Right? Because your consumer's not a moron, she's your wife. And if she's not buying it, then nobody is buying it. Right? And that's when we actually took on the task of saying, let's premiumize. And we came up with a whole host of names. I think I was privileged to be working with fantastic agencies like Amiens back in the day. We created this name called Absolute.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people say, come on, vodka brand, you can't really call makeup that, But Absolute also means gold standard. And we realized the need for creating a brand name that was borrowing from Lakme, but also adding a sheen of its own because it was talking to a younger consumer. So one of the challenges we must also realize is that today if Gillette was selling as Gillette, it is going to be a very hard story to tell. So you do need a Mark III to really talk to the premium consumer
Correct.
as much as you need a base product,
Correct.
which will talk to people who are seeking value.
Correct.
That's when we premiumize the business. And in premiumizing it, you never made the core look bad. So when you premiumize, it's very important that you premiumize all the way up to the lowest common denominator. Because you can never make a consumer feel less just because they didn't have the means, right? So that was an important learning. So you refresh the core, you premiumize on top, people aspire for premium, but they still go back and buy the core because they start thinking well of your brand. And I think that's the power of equity, right? You don't always sell the most of the premium products that you launch, but that halo of the equity helps people buy the everyday products, but with a lot more love and attachment for your brand. And I think rest is history that Absolute did really well for the business. We actually brought in a ambassador like Kareena on the brand. I think she stayed on the brand for as long as maybe over 12, 13 years.
Really?
And became synonymous for the brand, right? And then Lakme continues to be the market leader by far in all these years. Despite so much competitive heat, it never lost ground, right? And I think that's where many fantastic marketeers have put their energy behind it. And I think, this is something I would always say, and I was very impressed with many founders even someone like who's building Paid Safa, Sanjeev's example that we spoke about, right? I think the sharpest and most visionary founders or marketeers are folks who are able to be extremely visionary and very clear on why your brand exists, right? And their story should be evident through the life cycle of everything that you sell, from the product to the communication to your GTM. And I think that's really one example that I really felt taught me a lot as lessons that I've never forgotten.
How long were you on Lakme? Like through this?
3 years.
3 years. Wow.
Yeah, and then the other
Absolute
brand,
was the premiumization,
and then we refreshed
Absolute
the
Shield
core
came on the
core.
refreshed core.
Correct.
And then the
and then
growth
the whole
was-
business took off.
And was this growing?
I mean, growing at like 25-30% CAGR year on year for almost a decade. So it's incredible. Today, the brand is a over 1,000 crore brand, right? So when something does well, and I can tell you, Shantanu, what gives me the most amount of pride. Even with my time, when I would actually walk into the store, you can't not visit the brand you've built yourself with your own hands. The fact that we probably launched over 90 SKUs back in the day, and there are still about 30 to 40 SKUs which are
There.
on the shelf today,
Wow.
14 years down the line, that at least tells you something went right, And I think that is important.
What was the social stigma associated with makeup? Like, is it like women who wear makeup are more forward and?
So I had done a very interesting consumer study with a agency called Quantum. They're probably India's best ethnography-linked agencies because, see, typically to create relevance, you have to bust cultural barriers. So, we did this interesting experiment in 2011 where we made 5 women wear bright shade of red lipstick and walk into different kinds of offices.
Okay.
So we said, why don't you walk into say an ICICI bank, walk into a advertising agency, and then go ahead and walk into, say, a publishing house. Let's see how people perceive you. So in a bank, suddenly it's like a penny drop moment. Who's walked in?
Oh, really?
In an advertising agency, people would look at you and say, oh, she's cool, and forget about it and go back to business as usual. In a publishing house, again, the look was always like, oops, what's going on?
Really?
So then you realize how a color can go from being bold and beautiful to being fast, or do you have something in mind? And I think, Indian women are very complicated, And why I say that is because I think there's an inherent love and desire. There's a huge value associated to being naturally pretty. That's another reason why natural look does very well, and not just natural products. Everybody wants to be seen as, oh, I was born this way, So it's almost like your secret.
Yeah.
You just don't want anyone to know ki kiya kaise, right? And equally, you want to stand out. So that is what led us to the insight on makeup back in the day, which is makeup that doesn't look made up,
Wow.
Because women want to stand out while they blend in. They don't want to stand out so much that they get called out. But yet they want to be seen as being beautiful, but blending in.
Is it still the same? You think they?
Yeah, it must have evolved with over a period of time. But I think that piece of work really gave me a deep insight into how women
That's
were
very
thinking.
fascinating.
And, it's also the journey, say, like in our mom's generation, from women who were wearing kurtas with chudidar pajamas, and one fine day the chudidar pajama disappeared and she was wearing a dress.
Yeah.
And suddenly they got comfortable wearing dresses when they didn't grow up wearing dresses.
Yeah.
But it's something where it's a secret between you and your Darzi. He helped you take that leap.
Yeah.
And then it became the second you.
Correct.
Right? Even with makeup, it's like you hide your flaws. You become beautiful, but it's not so dramatic that people say, what's going on? You know? So I think there was an interesting cultural truth there. You know, that we come with our own conditioning. You know, and you can't undo your conditioning overnight.
Yeah.
Right?
How long did this take for Absolute, then refreshing of core, then
this
the
was
communication to
about
land, and then
2 to
for
3
it?
years, if I may be honest, because from working with recrafting the logo to launching a new segment to refreshing the core, I think the overall journey, and mind you, makeup always has about 350 to 400 SKUs.
Which is why this stuff takes much longer because
Much
you have
longer.
to take
Because
a
your pipeline has so much stock, right? So, but I think, you know, people were able to see the impact the moment Absolute came in. Because that sheen started to rub off. And then your average lipstick became better. And I think the other big leap we took, Shantanu, at that time was for a company whose average price of lipstick was 180 bucks. We launched a 900 rupee product and a 750 rupee product. Where people would be like, hello, your highest selling lipstick is 185. How are you going to sell this?
Yeah.
But you know, the important thing is to see, price also connotes quality. If you sell too cheap, you also then give away to the consumer that you probably haven't put in the goodies, right? So in beauty, it's very, very important to look at price as a leverage, you know, because a higher price product also allows you the ability to invest in your product and equally delight a consumer because she really gets something which she believes is worth paying more for, right? And it was a clever strategy because it was always priced lower than L'Oreal, but much higher than Lakme. So you always hit a sweet spot in offering value.
Yeah.
And the third interesting thing that we had done again for a brand that...
Very interesting, actually.
Yeah, so you definitely then have to create a moat which becomes your winning competitive edge, right? Because people will aspire for better, but they'll still go back and buy something which is just as good but better, right? And third thing is, we actually took the brand on TV. Because, you know, for a brand that had such a massive distribution footprint, the fact that it became visible and suddenly the brand went from just being in a retail BA counter to being seen in a larger-than-life environment, it gave the brand a very, very, very big fillip for it to continue to grow and sustain itself. And I think that also forces you to really look at your marketing spend differently, where you say, let's do less, but let's do better.
I think the moment your marketing goes TV, and I think Sudhir, our common friend, like Sudhir told me this very clearly, that the meat and potatoes of your business eventually will be television.
100%.
In some shape or form.
100%.
Right? So that's that. तो तेरे को ये सोचना है कि तू शेविंग फोम 300 करोड़ का कैसे बना सकता है.
Correct.
तो ये वाला रेजर 300 करोड़ का कैसे. And I had never thought about it that way. But when you do investments in like Kareena Kapoor plus television, plus I'm assuming 3-4 year budgets for sustain, that's how you do 25-30% CAGR. Of course, market dynamics kind of backing.
No, there's no other way, Shantanu. And that's the other learning which I had in, say, a brand like Harpic, right? Like now, Harpic for me was, again, a brand very close to my heart simply because it's not beauty. It's actually linked to a very, very fundamental human need of sanitation. So although when Modi gave the clarion call of building more toilets, see, we in India didn't have the habit of keeping the toilets clean. I mean, you'll be surprised if I tell you, Bangladesh was open defecation free almost 30 years ahead of India, right? Who would have ever imagined? As densely populated, probably at similar education levels, right? But behavior change takes its own share of time, right? And I think one of my biggest learnings on even Harpic was that the brand was originally launched to actually tell consumers that here's a liquid, it goes to places where even your brush can't, right? That's how simple the brand thought was way back in 1930s. Even today, the whole advertising pivots on building superiority. See what you use today versus Harpic, so much more superior.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the reason why I think there is a merit in being anal about playbooks is because, you know, behavior change and habit formation takes a very long time.
Correct.
Very, very long time. You know, and we had gone after looking at insights for rural. And we spent a lot of time trying to understand the behavior change model, the whole theory of nudge, right? That if you have to really link the habit with something which is also positive reinforcement, it doesn't always have to be negative, you know? And I think when we were looking at rural penetration, we realized that if today a teacher or a daughter-in-law, if they can become symbols of progressive India, they can really change mindsets.
Yeah.
So rural penetration for Harpic had jumped from almost 5% to 25%. And that happened primarily because in the piece of advertising, you had the lead protagonist, who's the daughter-in-law, telling the mom, saaf kiya hai, lekin saaf hua to nahi. क्योंकि अब स्वच्छ बनाना है. Swachh means to kill germs. And अब Harpik का ज़माना है. So she becomes the voice of progress. And there are very subtle nuances, but they are able to connote progress. And see, fundamentally, all of us want to be progressive.
Yeah.
And for me, the penny drop moment, Shantanu, was Dharavi. I had gone to visit slums in Dharavi. I was amazed here. A toilet cleaning product which all of us in urban India would be putting in our shelves and hiding it behind fancy cabinets because we don't want it to be visible. In a slum in Dharavi, that 200 ml bottle is put up on display because she's actually letting you know, guess what? I make the choice to spend this money because I keep my toilet clean. So it becomes a badge of showing that I am progressive.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where it's important to just step outside of your day-to-day life and visit same reality from other people's lens, and you realize how much symbolism is attached to the products that we use.
It's insane, actually. I was actually very close to, the open defecation and sanitation work. And it takes a long time because you think you understand the consumer, but you don't. A lot of people working on the brands are not living those lives.
Not at all.
And I don't know whether you remember, the government with Vidya Balan had launched.
Oh, I remember that.
Keep your women safe. It did not hit the
didn't do
message
well.
because, not for any other reason, but I think the insight that was missed was women would use that 15-20 minutes walk in the morning to the fields for defecation as a social exercise. It was their getaway from their home and their mother-in-law and their husband and their kids. It was when they socialized, they spoke, they kind of formed friendships, and then they came back home. Now if you put a toilet in the house, A, she has to clean it.
Absolutely.
And B, this 15-20 minutes or half an hour walk is taken away from her. And it in fact moved the decision
the
away.
communication that did very well was what Bill and Melinda Gates did.
Yes.
Because that became the
They changed
inspiration.
it.
They
Correct.
completely flipped it.
Correct.
They linked it to stigma.
Correct.
And the sort of people you are when you are still going ahead, even when you have a toilet.
Correct.
Right?
Because then it becomes izzat. And
Absolutely.
izzat is independent of
Absolutely.
social class, economic
Absolutely.
value, etc. etc. You're like, boss, and then if you have a toilet in the house, plus you're using Harpic to keep it clean,
Correct.
then you have doubled the izzat currency.
Absolutely. You'll be surprised, Shantanu. I had gone to Punjab, as part of Dubki work, just doing consumer immersions. Here I realized average family size of 7 to 8 people, one toilet. The whole day if people are using it, it is stinking like there's no tomorrow.
Correct.
Eventually what happens is people get tired of that smell and they start going back to the fields.
Correct.
Because they just don't keep it clean.
Correct.
So, or it becomes a mini shop or it becomes a storage dump yard.
Correct.
And everybody's taken the subsidy, but because the habit of cleaning is not there, the utility of the infrastructure becomes redundant.
Yes.
Right? And I had a very interesting conversation with a Sikh farmer family, right? And he didn't have a toilet till his girl became probably a teenager. And after that, it boiled down to exactly what you said, izzat.
Correct.
He said, there is a difference. I have 2 girls. Now it's about my pride.
Yeah.
So they will not step out of the house.
Yeah.
And izzat is a huge, huge, huge motivator.
Correct.
Correct.
But so there's one on Lakme. What are some of the other brands where you felt like, either marketing interventions or innovation interventions kind of really
I
made
think I was very lucky to actually have worked on brands that in some way or the other had big societal causes linked to it and had a big wave of purpose, which was inherently intertwined in it. And I think that's where I actually feel that, if people start resonating with what you stand for and why you exist, I think the way they then feel for your brands, it takes you away from that commoditization wave.
Yes.
Because you're suddenly able to separate yourself from other price warriors, right? And I think in that regard, whether it's Durex, you would be surprised there was a time, today it's a much bigger brand where the share of mind was so much greater than actually the turnover
Market
it
share,
makes.
correct.
So when I just came on the business, I was like, really? Is that how big it is? I always thought it was such a big brand because I'd never seen the numbers, know. And that's when condoms were under price control.
Correct.
So because of the price control, they could never invest on the business and it was a vicious circle. So
Correct.
we weren't investing, the business wasn't growing. So we said, never mind, let's actually look at really unlocking the premium end of the market because the mass end of the market was well capitalized by folks like Manforce.
Correct.
And then you say, what, there are 2 point of views to sex. You can either go the commoditization of women point of view, which is all about the chase, or you can actually really start talking and celebrating mutuality.
Correct.
You know, and normalize sex and really talk about mutual pleasure.
And
You know.
pleasure was Durex's
Forte.
they held
Absolutely.
it from a product standpoint to ribs
Absolutely.
and we are so proud
Yeah.
of the work Durex does because we work with them very
Yeah.
closely on it. But
Absolutely.
what a brand.
Absolutely. You know, so I still remember Durex used to be the best recruitment hack for the company, right? Because it's such an aspiring brand for people to work on. And I still remember once I went recruiting students in one of the universities in DU, don't ask me the name, but where we said, you know, Durex stands for great sex that moves you. And suddenly one young kid raised his hand and said, ma'am, any sex will move us because we are not getting any. So I was like, wow, that is indeed the reality of India. I said, wow, God bless you, my friend. This is indeed the truth.
Yeah, but you know that's such a it was very brave what Durex did. Frankly, in such a government regulated market
Correct.
where every advertisement goes through tremendous censorship.
Correct.
Online and offline. Whether
Correct.
we do performance marketing for Durex, boss, ads are
Correct.
very particularly
Correct.
managed and so on, right?
Correct.
But to go there and to not have a contraception first communication, but a pleasure first one at a premium level was
Correct.
brave. Like today it seems obvious, of course, that's where the world was
Absolutely.
moving. But to do it 10, 15 years back was I think,
Yeah, but you know,
brave.
I'll also give a lot of credit to the many people who came together. And, you know, like whether you look at an actor like Ranbir, you know, you also need, so for social change to happen, you also need to embody that change in people and then personify it for people,
Correct.
right? Otherwise, it becomes so difficult to take an esoteric idea and make it work for yourself day to day.
But talk a little bit about this. You speak about Kareena and
Yeah.
Lakmé very closely.
Correct.
Like even right now,
Correct.
you spoke about the faces for your brands.
Correct.
Nitish, for example, when he speaks, he's had a storied career at Reckitt.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for him, I met him once, and in that one meeting, he was so proud of this red and blue Harpic, red man and Harpic, blue man, and how they came together in
Yeah.
this ad. And it's amazing how personification of the brand and the promise.
Correct.
Now you're talking about Ranveer.
Correct.
We have never done that at scale. We
Yeah.
had Ashwin, we had
Yeah.
Alaya, we worked with faces for a few months at a time.
Yeah.
We never had the budgets.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about what did someone like a Ranveer do with Durex, and I hear that he writes his own scripts and he changes things at the last moment and
Indeed.
does a lot of cool stuff as well.
Yeah, true. But you know, I'll tell you what, it was interesting because see, Durex was at a point of time where it came out of price control. It already had a big share of mind because amongst marketers, it was always perceived to be this extremely cool brand. But if you look back at India, condom penetration per se was very small.
Very small, correct.
Right?
It still is very
It
small.
still is very small. So therefore, if you were today a business head on condoms, your biggest problem statement is to expand the pie. And because your pricing is 3 or 4x the market average,
You
you
can't
would
do
go
that.
after the premium pie,
Correct.
right? And see, condom is a very interesting category because the usage of it is much higher when sex is not legit. Okay, because that's when people have multiple partners. Because it is fundamentally seen as a pleasure killing category, right? Because it creates friction. There's a huge barrier to usage because it kills pleasure, right? Then you actually have to deep the one layer below and say, all right, it also prevents STD. It also can be delivered in a way where it doesn't kill pleasure, but it also protects you, right? So that you can actually live your life without really feeling the pressure. In that regard is when we realize that in India, if people aren't even going to talk about sex, leave alone go buy a product category in a manner which will be helpful. So I think in the last 5 years, probably what has given the sexual wellness category the biggest boost is online business.
Yeah.
Because it allows for discreet purchase.
Correct.
It allows for many more people to ask uncomfortable questions online or even to buy categories which are purely for pleasure.
Correct.
Whether it's lubes, it's play rings. But you know, it's normalized the category online. But in that era, the online contribution was next to nothing. We had just started listing it on Snapdeal, and this is way back in 14.
Correct.
Right? That's when we actually realized here that if you have a mainstream actor who can actually go out there and talk about loving sex and making sure that he believes in mutual pleasure, you know. So the whole film actually started. So of course there was a launch film which was about Do the Rex, you know, which is about really making the word Durex top of mind.
Yeah.
But here again, you have to take it one step forward
Deeper,
and say,
yeah.
what do you really stand for? And that's when actually Ranveer did an interesting campaign with us in MTV, where he went and actually said, I love having sex. And guess what? So does everybody. Otherwise, we wouldn't be a billion people.
Correct.
So why are we ashamed of it? And then he spoke about the Kama Sutra, the fact that it's part of our heritage. And the more openly we can talk about it, the more we'll normalize it, and the easier it'll become for us to practice safe sex.
Yeah.
I think those sort of campaigns really allowed the brand to stand for a very strong why, you know. And I think that entire piece of work also explained to me personally that relevance building is probably the hardest but most important exercise if you really want to create hero products. Because, you know, hero products are not just about Tom. Because someone can outdo you on Tom.
Correct.
I'll spend more money, I'll outdo you.
Correct.
But if you make the category relevant for me and show me why you're so superior, then you will have me forever.
Yeah.
You know?
I think insight is outstanding. I'm sure, I want to ask you this before I actually tell my personal observation. Did you ever think whether a male voice like Ranveer or a woman's voice talking about women's pleasure, did you ever have that debate internally within Durex to say who
You know,
should?
not at that time because, see, Shantanu, was also a right time for every conversation to be had. So the first conversation actually has to be from the lens of the guy who's either resisting the product or buying the product.
Correct.
And in a lot of cases, he's actually resisting the category, right? Because it's killing the pleasure for him.
Correct.
So that's when we felt that first approach it from the lens of a man, right? Then take it a notch further. Now, today I had also the privilege of working in Kurtlam more recently on a brand like Sirona. Now, Sirona does a whole lot of conversation, which is to women, because along with menstrual health, you are also looking at sexual wellness and you're looking at least normalizing periods and period pain.
Correct.
I think it's just about the right time.
Correct.
You know, because some conversations, if they are done ahead of their time, they don't resonate. But if you take it one step at a time in a continuum, it falls in place.
Because I think for younger men, and this is again an
Yeah.
insight which I've learned over a period of time, I'm like, yeah, it's absolutely true. For younger men, the pleasure of the woman far supersedes his own pleasure
Correct.
in the initial years of sexual activity.
Correct.
For him, his masculinity, his manliness, everything is, was I able to please her or not?
Correct.
Right? And if he
Correct.
did, I think he kind of pats himself on the back. And that's where, you know, Durex plays such a beautiful role in being his friend almost, so that the whole shirking the category becomes kind of almost welcoming the category, because now we have the same objective function in a way.
Absolutely. And you know, the other thing is a lot of times we also look at our businesses only from a very left brain lens, right? But actually consumer brands or consumer tech, it's a marriage of left and right brain. You know, because you need your heart, your head, your instinct to all work in conjunction for you to actually make that decision. And mostly all our decisions are irrational, right? And right, so I mean, if you look at, and whether it's purchase, it's love, I mean, a lot of our, I mean, we are fundamentally irrational, right? So then the nudge has to be either context or the right environment or someone you look up to. But there has to be some agent of behavior change.
Correct.
You know, otherwise, how else will adoption happen? And which is why, actually, if you look at the entire influencer industry, why is it actually doing well? What's the core insight? The core insight is nothing but word of mouth. I see you do it, you like it, I'm now less hesitant to try it. Right? Otherwise, honestly, why else would influencer industry really grow? Because you would actually say, okay, man, celebrity, you rubbish it, saying he must be endorsing from an inverter to a fairness cream. But okay, she looks like me, she's relatable, or she tried it, it must have been good enough. Let me try it. Because see, an online industry, unlike offline, where there's no touch and feel, the risk of making a first purchase is high.
Much higher, yeah.
And that's where I think influencer-led advertising has created brands simply because they take away that risk. They are just visualizing word of mouth for you, in my view.
Yeah, no,
You know?
absolutely true.
So
Absolutely true.
what we used to expect out of massive trial generating exercises, like back in the day when Vim really grew, people would do like insane amount of sampling to say hopefully that will trigger down into an experience and then word of mouth. Today all of that is getting replicated online.
Correct.
Because the lady switches on the camera, she records it, she opens the pack for you, she unboxes it for you,
Shows it, yeah.
she applies it, and then she says, bravo. And you're like, huh, not bad, let me try it.
Social
That's
proof
how-
is, yeah, very quick.
Social
very good.
proof is in your face. So I think that's the reason why influencer industry is actually continuing to do well. In my view, it'll continue to do well. And especially for niche businesses, niche brands, your first time trial or even for new category adoption, it really takes away risk.
That
You
is
know?
so true.
And I think, speaking of the example that Nitish also gave you, was a very good example because, see, for a brand like Harpic, which stayed consistent for almost 30, 40 years in India, having that person who comes, rings your bell, comes into your bathroom, shows you how Harpic is superior, gets you to buy it. Here, the decision of doing a category stretch started with a test market. The test market took its fair share of time. That's when the simple promise was demystified to saying what's good enough for your toilet, that same gold standard quality is now for your bathroom.
Yeah.
So acid for your toilet, bleach for your bathroom.
Correct.
You know, simple equity transfer of the gold standard equity from surface area 1 to surface area B.
Correct.
Right? But imagine if the same brand would have today been a D2C brand.
Correct.
And would have done 100 product proliferation. You would have said, oh my God,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Yeah. What do you stand for?
What do you stand for?
Correct.
And that's why I think for people who've spent most of their careers in organizations where you've built brands, but which are hinged on heroes, I think invariably you'll hear them ask the same questions.
Yeah.
What are those 1 or 2 products that are your heroes which are single-handedly good enough to be taken on TV?
Yeah, because for me, and actually this will come to the next segue for you, which is how you built your career, right? I think from HUL, which had a very strong brand building ethos, to Reckitt, where there was far stronger margin and profit ethos, along with building brands and health hygiene, right?
Correct.
To L'Oreal, which actually has a lot more proliferation, a lot more inorganic. They want to be for the woman. They want to stand for her beauty.
And L'Oreal is a pioneering company, and I think people don't understand their genius is actually in massifying trends. They don't always...
Say more.
Massification of trends is if they picked up a cushion 10 years ago in Korea as a budding idea, the pace with which they take the idea and massify it in the world is absolutely unparalleled. So they are probably the biggest massificators of trends that can originate anywhere in the world.
And these could be super niche, and
they can be super niche.
Give me examples of this. Like,
so I'll
for
give you
example,
2 examples.
I'll tell you one example before L'Oreal, which LV told me yesterday about this brand called SK2 in PNG.
Fantastic.
Apparently like a $200
Japanese
anti-aging. I had no idea.
Correct.
And apparently, so when you are working in rice fields in Japan, while fermenting sake, the water from that process on your hands makes your hands less wrinkly. So the scientists saw 75, 80-year-old Japanese women with like 30-year-old hands. And they said, how is this happening? And they said, because of the work we do. They picked that up for last 35, 40 years. It's been the same story. But it could have been a very niche thing.
Yeah.
But SK2 was bought, then P&G bought it, and then they massified it. And I found that to be such
Incredible.
a fascinating thing to do it at a luxury level all over the world. It's such a beautiful brand.
Absolutely.
But talk about how L'Oreal does it. It's very fascinating to hear.
Yeah, because the reason why nobody has actually been able to replicate that company is because they hire differently. Okay. They genuinely hired truly what you call diverse people.
Okay.
Could be liberal arts masters, very diverse crew, which is genuinely passionate about the science of beauty and beauty. But what they do remarkably well is in any part of the world, if they're able to spot a trend that is massifying, they are incredible in making it a global story.
And how do they do what the playbook?
I think the playbook is inherently linked with first identification of the right trend. So to give you an example, when Cushion got launched,
what is Cushion?
Cushion is a kind of a foundation which is very, very, it's very airless. It's a format which Koreans started with about a decade ago, which comes like a compact powder, but it's actually a wet foundation.
Okay.
And you apply it one stroke, it gives you the perfect look. It was born in Korea, but the pace at which they took that innovation and straddled it across the price portfolio, from Lancome to L'Oreal, to all the way to Maybelline. So suddenly you're able to offer the same benefit across price points, across geographies.
It picked up in India as well?
It picked up in all the beauty first countries, but it was a big trend even in India, right? So, and the pioneering brand there was actually Laneige, Amore Pacific's brand. But so that was an interesting trend. Or for that matter, there was in hair color, if they picked up a trend called balayage, where women were starting to color their hair in a manner where you will see multiple colors on your hair, right? They would make that as a trend and again, massify it worldwide, right? And I think that is a genius of the company where you're able to do trend spotting and massify. And second thing where I really think I really learned it well from them is that there was an interesting study I was seeing in Financial Times the other day that versus conglomerates which had wider portfolios and as a reference point, say a Unilever or a Procter or a Coty, L'Oreal as a company has a very sharp portfolio in BPC. So all the acquisitions further strengthen their dominance in the category where they play. If you actually see a 25-year history or even the last 10 years, the share price has outperformed by a long shot versus conglomerates which have a much wider portfolio. right? So I think sectoral strength and having a focused play over a long period of time also gives you a fantastic compounding benefit.
Is this a French thing? Is it like a French? Because LVMH possibly does very similarly, right?
Yeah, because I think they really know their core well and they are really able to resist not trying to be who they're not. So even if you see all their acquisitions, they further strengthen their own sectoral strength. So they are also a conglomerate by all means.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
any brand or any company that's on a rise, it gets lapped up, right? Like when NYX was really starting to trend in US, it was an influencer built brand. It was bought, right? So they are extremely smart and astute about building brands. I mean, today when Australia had Aesop, which was absolutely pioneering in this entire natural domain, got picked up. So Laura has been very clever in the kind of acquisitions they've done, or even CeraVe,
Yeah.
right? Now today, and so much ahead of the Dermat boom, right? But they are very, very, very focused on their sector.
Core.
And if you actually see the share prices, it's remarkable. The graph tells a story.
It's insane actually, because I was just talking to another friend of mine about how India as a country has actually struggled to build global businesses, including in IT where we think we are global, but we typically just send very very almost cookie cutter type people to every situation, whether it's a bank or it's a aerospace company or wherever. So even in IT, we have not really
And
become
a lot
global.
of it is so linked to our education, no?
Yeah.
Genuinely. I mean, why is it that today when you see so many kids who are going to a US to study are coming back with a slightly different bent of mind, which is a lot more inquiry based and inquisitive, versus I think our education, which was far more,
Prescriptive almost.
very prescriptive. Yeah, like I think there was only one way of doing everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I actually really credit my liberal arts education massively, Shantanu, because I think I remember when I joined my course in sociology in LSR, the first thing the professor said is there are no books, and you are actually going to write a paper based on your original thinking. For the first 10 minutes, it made everybody so uncomfortable, saying, the hell, what are we going to write? And how will we pass? And it was all about sitting in the library and finding your own version of truth.
Wow.
And I think that as a discipline, and she was super clear that you're not going to become an engineer and get yourself a job, but it'll give you a worldview and a perspective that will allow you to see the world in a lot less judgmental manner.
You're trained to think.
You're trained to think. And I think there is a lot of value in that.
And I think L'Oreal is, because, and you said something about very, very diverse recruitment, because the same cushion to launch it with an Indian team versus a Brazilian team versus
Correct.
an American team versus, a French team, for example, a world of difference.
The amount of reading which an average product manager does in that company, of blogs,
Oh, really?
of content about what's going on, I can guarantee it to you. I have never seen it in my professional career. And I think that is what builds passion for those categories. See, categories like beauty are purely passion-driven categories, because I don't believe anyone can work on categories like these unless you feel for it. And then you actually have to hire people who feel for it. It's in a way similar to even a category like pet food,
Yeah.
or even someone who today decides to become a founder in the pet space. I mean, if you have no love for the pets, you're never going to think and feel
Correct.
for what you're building.
No, absolutely.
Right? So I think there are segments here in which I think the only source of truth is experience and passion for genuine interest in that business. Where you have on the floor makeup artists who are sitting with you, who are doing this day in and day out for living and who are designing products with you. You just do it differently, right?
Correct.
And I think look at us when we go out to hire. We just look at pedigree. Were you day zero? Are you like the best in your batch? I don't give a rat's ass if you were actually good enough. I mean, like you cared a lot about what you were selling or not. You could have been selling a comb or an inverter with the same passion or the lack of it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't build products. To build products, you really have to feel for what you're creating.
And that becomes the moat, right? Because if you have people working like that, then it's very unlikely that your category or your innovations then become commoditized.
Yeah, they don't. Because they're not trying to copy,
Yeah.
They are not basically saying, okay, let's quickly open the website of another brand and say, okay, what are they doing? And let's just do the same thing.
Correct.
They are actually happy to read a blogger who's probably talking about an ingredient she has found, and then they start researching on the ingredient. Then they start looking at the science of it and then say, okay, let's try this out. And I think it's a totally different way of approaching the same problem. right? And I think that's another reason why no matter what we say, we always look at L'Oreal as a company which is highly innovative,
Yeah.
right? That innovative edge comes from being pioneering, right? And I think the way they've also embraced tech. So today, the way they've been able to marry consumer products with technology which is woven in, it is remarkable. Because again, non-linear.
Because if you're that acquisitive and you go deep yourself, it's very unlikely that
Correct.
that synergy will not exist.
Correct. Correct.
Especially if you are someone who's like, I'm assuming they're globally very well connected.
Yeah.
Like all the senior team, etc. I'm sure they have a huge expat.
Correct.
Like you said you you spend time in Paris and Bombay.
Correct.
I'm sure everyone is kind of doing that, spending time with each other.
Correct.
It requires visionary. Like for example, I was talking to a friend of mine who's trying to build a US business for an Indian chemicals major, and it's just so natural to just hire an Indian person and send them there.
Yeah.
And well, you don't need that. You need someone who can kind of build a business there, who's local, who understands the.
That's true. But you know, Shantanu, I'll tell you another thing which is really missing in our DNA is the power of training.
Okay.
You know, like even for someone who I joined there as a general manager. Like I wasn't like a entry level person, but there is something called métier. Like whether it's for skin, it's for hair, which basically is a French word for training. Essentially, the knowing the craft. The amount of time that gets spent on training people is absolutely remarkable.
Really?
And I think that makes a very big difference. You know, because if you don't understand the science, the molecule, what does it take to actually create that? You know, it's very easy to create products, but very difficult to create amazing products. That actually comes with how well you train your people. Yeah. Because, you know, that I think, unfortunately, it becomes even harder in startups because monies are finite. You're constantly basically trying to scale with very limited resources. You know, you're always a dollar less, a person less, probably many people less. But I still feel, irrespective, if you can actually over-invest on training, neither will people leave you.
Yeah.
And they'll actually take a lot lesser time because they know they've been invested upon and the quality of output improves. So it's actually good for business, you know.
Interesting. I actually want it was something I wanted to ask you, and you said you leave a company once, right? You spent 8 years at HUL, 2 stints at Reckitt, L'Oreal. Talk about how you thought about building a career at different stages. Like, how did you optimize for skill? How did you optimize for experience? How did you optimize for mentorship? At some points, I'm sure you've left for an organization versus left for working with an individual wherever they were, right? And you started when you must have been, 2021, because you started straight out of LSR,
Absolutely.
right? So from 21 till today, a 20 plus year career, how have you thought about building it? And did you take those calls consciously, increasingly consciously, or till now it's kind of just been a lot more take it as you go, each moment for itself? I know, again, loaded question, but I like to ask those to kind of go deeper on.
No, it's a really good question, yeah. So I'll tell you, I've had 3 guiding principles, Shantanu. So first, I would probably, like I was mentioning it to you inside, leaving your first job is like first love. It's very hard, because especially in an organization like HUL where you feel like a college kid, you have incredible memories, you stay together, you have, even today probably my closest friendships are still residing there.
So 8 years is a long time.
Of course, it's a long time, it's your first job, you're emotional about what you've built together. I think a lot of where I am in life, I owe it to the organization for what it made me. But I remember that leaving HUL was very hard, right? And my reason at that time was, again, personal. So I think to simplify the answer, I think my thinking principle always started to optimize for family, right? I mean, and I always felt that my work is a very, very important part of my life, but it still will be number 2 to my family.
Was it?
Right, always. And I think the only reason I've ever left, with the exception of L'Oreal, was for family reasons, right? So when I decided to move from Levers to Delhi, it's because my husband was based in Delhi and we had been doing long distance for a while.
Yeah.
So then I said, now is a good time, because literally after getting married, I moved back to Bombay. And immediately after my marriage, I think we had almost 3 to 4 years of long distance. And that was probably okay because we never lived together, right? It's much harder once you live together as a family and then you separate, right? At that point of time, I was very passionate about what I was building at Lakme, and it felt right to be back in Bombay. So first move was primarily for family reasons. Then the other move that came to L'Oreal actually was really to get myself out of the comfort zone, because I hadn't done a stint abroad and I felt that I'd always worked in Anglo-Saxon cultures. So whether it was HUL, which was Anglo-Dutch, or Reckitt, which was again a British company, I felt, a French organization will really throw me out of my comfort zone, So that's the one big reason why I actually took it up, and probably my best decision, if you ask me in hindsight, because it was such a hard job.
Yeah.
If you ask me, hard, more from resilience building, where you're not a French speaker, you're trying to live in a new place all by yourself at a time in your life where you also start to become a lot more fixed in your ways. I went in my mid-30s. I wasn't exactly straight out of college. So I think that was pivotal in terms of my learning. And then again, I think post that, the second shift which I made, which I was towards Good Lamb, again was with the same reason that, I'd spent almost 18 years working in MNCs, where for whatever it's worth, Shantanu, you're still very sheltered, It is a bubble in a lot of ways because these are cash-rich organizations. Their fixed deposit accounts would be more than the PAT of almost 100 companies put together,
Correct.
right? So it's still a very safe environment where between good and incredible, the gap is not as wide because distribution solves for a lot, which you can take for granted, and the company's inherent strength solves for a lot, right? And that's when I actually decided to join Good Glam, is because I felt that, today in the next 20 years, invariably the world will actually belong to new age companies, and they will all scale, but they will build a new muscle. So I think one thing that I would definitely share in my journey is that I think in any stint, whether I was working with a boss I loved or a stint in which a company I loved, I think around 2.5 to 3 years is when I always had the itch to say, now I'm starting to get comfortable, and it would be the death of me. So I definitely think that in every stint of mine, wherever I got too comfortable, I decided to pull out. I never ended up working with someone who was a big supporter of me more than once because I felt that, it'll make me too comfortable and then I wouldn't know how to survive. And I think that desire of constantly throwing myself in uncomfortable scenarios is the reason why I kept taking the moves while keeping family at the forefront of my decision making. And I think that is something that I would always tell everybody, See, comfort is great, but unfortunately it also decays you. And if you don't throw yourself out there to work with people who are different from you, organizations that are different from yours, you will never challenge yourself to even know whether you have it in you. And I think that resilience that you build, even if you don't even if you don't succeed, I think is absolutely incredible. Because it just teaches you that you will survive and this too shall pass. And I think that also is a learning, that every day you will not win and every day will not be yours and you're not going to enjoy it every day. But it's okay. Just put your head down and just show up the next day, and it's all going to be okay. But that is a learning. And I'm sure nobody knows it better than the founder community, right? It is resilience building.
But founder is also very irrational. But so you're saying guiding principle number one is family takes forefront.
Always.
And you solved for Kunal or for your mother and your close family.
Correct.
Second is you don't want to stagnate.
Absolutely.
And 2.5, 3 years is actually very quick, right?
2.5, 3 years could be a stint. Or see, Harpic for me was 4 years. The marketing assignment there was about 4 years. I'm saying you will know at what point where you feel, say 4 years could be a time where you feel now I've learned and I'm starting to do more of the same thing. I'm not challenging myself, right? I think, as long as the problem keeps exciting you, you're always going to wake up and be excited, right? And sometimes, it's also serendipity when opportunities come knocking on your door. So things are not as linear, but only thing is when it comes knocking into your door, what's your first response? Do you say yes or do you say no? And I think more often than always, I'm in the camp of taking the plunge, and not worrying too much about thinking through the last mile. Because, a lot of things will be fine.
You're an instinctive decision maker. Have you made the decision before you've thought about it?
No, I'm somewhere in between. My heart tells me what I'm going to do instinctively, but I will then not take the decision. I'll still wait out. And I'll take the decision after I've rationally thought it through. But I do listen to my instincts. But I just wait on it.
has your heart chosen wrong and you've kind of decided otherwise? A lot of people make the decision and then take the time to kind of just validate it.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be me. So in my instinct, I would say yes, but I would still take the time to just validate it for myself. So that, you just, see, you will not know everything, right? I mean, come on, who would know sitting today how tomorrow will pan out?
Correct.
The only thing you can solve for is to just be certain that at least the few things that matter are secure. That's about it. So for me, Paris was a big decision because I was going to uproot myself from India, from an organization where I was doing well and I really, really respected the leaders I worked with. But I just told myself first principles, right? If the first principle is to keep learning and is to grow, then this is the right decision, and I've just followed my heart in that theory in my life. Because, it's like, Shantanu, I always say this to a lot of times when people are in that paradox in their head, ye kare ki ye kare. I always say one thing to everyone, just go back to your formative years in life, right? Which are always I would say first 15 to 20 years of your life. What was your pattern of decision making, right? Did you pick the easy path or did you pick the uncomfortable path? And you will know yourself. And there is no right or wrong answer. There are people who find great strength in comfort, or for that matter, in things which are more predictable and stable. I won't even call it comfort. It's just predictability.
Correct.
There is a path for you. Then there are people who inherently seek out madness and chaos. I think I was always in that category. Either chaos finds me or I find it. So you just have to be honest about where does your mojo lie. The challenge happens when we are a certain kind of a person, but we try and become someone else. If you are one with who you are, you will be absolutely fine.
When did you get the self-awareness?
Yeah, so I did a Vipassana course in 2016, and I think those 10 days, and for anyone who knows me well, Shantanu, I love food. Okay, I'm a Sadarni who loves her food.
Okay.
And of course, you can hear in this conversation, I also absolutely love talking. So when I went for Vipassana, most people who knew me said, oh my God, she's going to run away in 2 days. My own husband sent me WhatsApp messages daily saying, listen, I'm not going to judge you, come back. But those 10 days of just being with myself, I think really gave me a lot of clarity of who I'm not.
Okay.
And what drives me, what are my core fundamental motivators in life. And I think that, frankly, today, if you ask me, you can ditch reading 100 books, but man, everybody should give themselves that one 10-day period for yourself. I think it's by far the most remarkable experience. Your power of observation goes up so much the moment you shut off 2 senses.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, I would see a flower blossom 10 days walking on the same path. It just changes how much you see when you quieten up your mind. And it starts with, that silence is only the first step. The hardest challenge is to quieten this.
Yeah.
And is to recognize that your mind is just another organ in your body. So don't overemphasize on what your head thinks.
Correct.
Because half our problems actually begin with overthinking. Whether it's on people or it's on how things will pan out. I mean, you're constantly overthinking and thinking, ye hoga, wo hoga. Sometimes none of that actually happens. But it's a shadow battle in your own head.
Yeah.
And if you just take it on face value and tell yourself, it's going to be okay. It usually is.
Yeah.
What
is the most counterintuitive revelation about yourself that you kind of figured out in those 10 days?
Yeah, I always felt that I was very brave, who loved all sorts of challenges and I'll tell you two dominant logics that really got challenged in my head, for me, for myself personally. Yeah, first was, I think the fact that I always felt that, I was constantly running, but you sometimes feel you're running away, but sometimes you're running with the joy of discovery.
Correct.
So the revelation for me was in all that running as well, I was still missing my roots.
Okay.
And that biggest revelation that came to me, Shantanu, was that I need to go back and grow where I was planted. And in those 2.5, 3 years, I lived out of a suitcase. I must have traveled so much that you can't even imagine. So there was at one point, how much you love traveling.
Yeah.
And then coming home just changes everything. I think those 10 days probably told me that international experiences are great if that's who you are. But it's highly overrated for someone who fundamentally seeks to grow where they're planted. I think that clarity was very helpful. It made me take the right decisions, and which also implied that some paths will not be for me. So then I had the clarity in my head saying that if there was a global career, it's not going to be my path, right? I will perhaps build businesses, but I will grow where I'm planted. And I think that's where I get my energy, my roots give me my joy, the friendships or the family that I have, who I've been with, is probably my greatest source of strength. And the more I go away from my center of gravity, when I'm away from the core, the unhappier I get. So I realized for myself that, the paradigm of my life and my success and my happiness will no longer be determined by the jobs I'll do or by the companies I'll build. They will always be determined by the relationships I'll build. And those relationships, like your jobs, need time, need love, need investment. But most importantly, they need time to nurture. And I think that was probably my most important insight.
I will grow where I'm planted.
100%.
Building careers in global consumer businesses.
Yeah.
I see Colgate and Reckitt closely. Of course, you work with Colgate, Unilever, L'Oreal. But I think your path to the top, if you want to be a global CEO or a global CXO, involves a very strange life of being in different countries every 3-4 years with your spouse and children following you, changing schools. It is good for the children in a way that they become global citizens very early, but it completely diminishes the career of the spouse. Alternately, you become a pigeon husband or a pigeon wife where you are far away and your roots are somewhere else, right? Is that what you saw as well, and is that fundamentally why you realized, okay, this is not a path, and it want to kind of come back and then build business which is kind of more local, where you are planted, as you called it?
The reason why I always go back to just knowing yourself is that, I think like I mentioned, Shantanu, there's probably no right path or wrong path. It's about knowing who you really are, right? Now, today, if you look at global organizations, fundamentally they thrive on globalization. It's imperative for a global organization to export talent, because you will always have a demand-supply gap. There will be markets which have a much bigger talent pool versus markets where talent pool is extremely scarce. So you will invariably need to move people from countries that have massive talent availability and export them, right? India is probably one of the most remarkable countries when it comes to fantastic professional leadership talent, right?
And very high density, like very high talent density.
Extremely high talent density of very competent leaders, right? Now, I've known my husband since I was in school or college. Both of us were people who've built our careers and are immensely proud of the journeys we've had together. And I think that's the point which I often reflect upon. See, today for global organizations to sell this dream of a global career is absolutely imperative for their survival. Because if you didn't sell that dream, how will you export talent?
Correct.
Right? And honestly, there are people who love and thrive in the adventure of being in different countries from time to time. But if you go back to understanding what really drives you, and that's where I think whether it's a Vipassana or it's any meditative technique that you might do, you just get to know yourself. I think for me, this realization dawned on me in probably 2015, 2016, when I had also bought into the global dream. I had never done an international stint. I actually went out, lived in Paris, had a phenomenal time learning. It added a lot of value to me, but it also made me realize I was awfully lonely, And I was somebody who came to this realization for myself, and that's where I'm only speaking for myself, and even for anyone who hears my story, it's important to realize what's your story and be honest to who you are and what makes you tick. I think for me, being part of the journey with people I have loved in my life really makes me come alive. Whether it's friends I've grown up from school, family I've been with. So I think for me, just growing at my pace where I was planted is important for me, right? And I felt the honest answer in my heart that if I really succeeded and built a mountain of a career, but being away from my family, at the end of the day, it'll actually amount to nothing for me, right? And I think that struggle with dual careers, and I think that's where more and more organizations will have to take cognizance, especially in times to come where you have two competent people who come together, is that invariably when one person pursues their career at the cost of the other competent person, eventually it creates a very big gap. It's okay to go out there and take a trophy and thank your spouse and say, thank you for sacrificing. But is that really the thank you that you're looking for? You're much better off, in my view, at probably a 70 plus 70 as a 150 versus one person becoming a 150 and the other person being the supporter, right? And that could be a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And I'm not actually saying this that, see, invariably, call it patriarchy or call it conditioning, in 9 out of 10 cases, the male career takes the precedence. But fact of the matter is, yeah, it eventually creates an unhappy family, in my view, right? Because you've taken away from a very capable person their opportunity to grow. Versus that, I mean, in my book, just to be able to grow probably at a relatively slower pace or in a different way or in a different career path is fine, as long as both can grow and thrive together while being with the ecosystem that makes us come alive. See, fundamentally, human beings thrived in communities. We lived in villages. It took a village to raise a child, And I think we all at some level, even if you look at societies like Japanese societies, and whether you read people where longevity is the highest. I mean, what do we all come back to? It's a sense of purpose. Where is that ikigai coming from?
Yeah.
Meaningful work that gives you purpose, community or relationships which are long-standing, that give you joy.
Yeah.
And I think those two variables are not one or the other.
Correct.
It has to be both. Just because I choose to grow where I'm planted does not mean I want to sit at home. I still want to be relevant. I want to add value. But equally, I want to add value without being alone.
Yeah.
Or not at the expense of my spouse's career. Right? So I think that's where couples have to have those honest conversations about what does it really mean when you choose not to go.
Yeah.
Then you choose a different path. And I think that's where I reached a realization for myself beyond a point that I'm not resentful if it's not an MNC career. I'm probably grateful because for those 2 decades, it gave me my foundational strengths. And after I've built a family, today I would love to grow and find opportunities that allow us both to thrive. And I think that's what brings me a lot of joy when I can be part of everyday celebrations of people, their lives on an everyday basis. Not coming back once a year and starting. I mean, you may still start from where you left, but you've really taken a journey which maybe was fantastic, but it's still a lonely journey, And I think that's what was probably my source of truth. And that's where I think a lot of what I probably grew up idolizing got debunked. Because the truth is there's no version of truth that can be real for everybody. You have to be honest about the version that applies to you. If you are somebody who's highly affiliative, who gets the energy from the friends and family or the core that you've built, then you have a different path.
Correct.
And if you're somebody who is someone who really enjoys the adventure of being on your own, you get your energy elsewhere and there's no one to judge. But you've got to know what makes you tick and what makes your family and your career tick.
Correct.
Right? But one thing that I always say this to returning moms, I say this to women post-marriage, please love your career. Do not be apologetic for being ambitious. Be extremely, extremely ambitious when it comes to your own vision for your own self, right? Like as visionary as you are for the businesses that you build, but have a grand vision for yourself. And it doesn't mean that you will not have to make trade-offs. Of course you will, but at least don't miss on the opportunity that this generation has got today for women to be able to seek support from friends and family and yet go out there and make a meaningful difference. I genuinely believe versus my parents' generation, women today are extremely privileged versus where we were, right? And I still feel it's a long journey.
Yeah.
But I think every woman who steps out, comes back post-maternity, even if she's getting tired, but she needs to just remind herself she is inspiring that little toddler back home who looks at her and says, I want to be you, mommy. And I really believe in that. I was raised by a mom who worked till 60, and she always told me, no matter who you marry, break your own bread. And I think that learning never left me, because what financial independence does is it not only gives you a voice in a relationship, it gives you a sense of purpose and meaning, where you yourself have an identity beyond the relationships that define you. And that's important. And equally, going back and nurturing your soul with people who make you come alive is important, and life is really short here. Today we hear of people, especially in the post-COVID world, who are not even seeing a life beyond 50. In that world, if not knowing what makes you tick is a problem.
Yeah.
But the truth is, like today when our parents raised us, they also gave us a lot of free play.
Yeah.
Dude, for any kind of real original thinking to happen, it starts with boredom.
Yeah.
You have to stare at that fan moving with nothing to do.
Yeah.
And that is super critical. Because if you don't know what it is to get bored, how on earth will you start imagination?
Yeah.
So constant stimulation is,
And playing.
and sport, which is super critical.
Comparative, you learn competitive spirit, you get
Correct.
hurt, you know how to
Absolutely.
recorrect, you know how to stand up once
Yeah.
you are fallen, you get humiliated.
Correct.
I remember playing football.
Correct.
And like missing an open goal, it stayed on my mind for a month. But
Correct.
it's probably the most character building thing I've gone through, because you then kind of learn teamwork. I think Paris Olympics, of course, gives you a big sense, but it's every 4 years. But
I think you'll realize that there are cultures which thrive on team sports, and then there are also societies which thrive on individual
Individual
sports.
sports,
And that actually, Shantanu, reflects in the way organizations work. And that was my biggest observation in France. As a society, they thrive on individual sport.
Oh, really?
They thrive on individual heroism, artists. I mean, even if you see gold standard math, anything which has eye for detail, and massive, fantastic players which are individual heroes.
Yeah.
So the society, they thrive on individualism. Now throw that back to countries where team sports are really celebrated, hockey, cricket,
Football, yeah.
You can never win alone. So, it also reflects on the sort of managers and leaders you become as a society. So in India, we sometimes underestimate, but the fact that we come alive in team sport as a nation
Yeah.
is also something. Even if a Sachin Tendulkar is brilliant, he cannot win the match till the rest of the 10 add up.
Correct.
Right? And I think one of the things which probably India has really learned, and I think this World Cup was a great testament of that, whether or not you get along, but when you're in that field, you better stand up as a team.
Correct.
And I think this team really showed it this time.
Yeah.
Put everything else aside, India comes first.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that also does tell you what do we really look at as who are our heroes.
Yeah.
So teams are our heroes in a country like ours, right? And I think
Hockey
it's
now, our bronze medal team.
our bronze medal team.
Yeah.
And I think that, so much of what we become is so intrinsically linked to our first 5 or 10 years. If you're pushing your kids into team sport, they'll shape up a certain way versus individual sport where, again, they'll build resilience. But it'll make them a certain way, right? And that's where actually I'm a big, big, big fan of this book range.
Yeah.
I truly, truly identify with the thesis.
Yeah.
That breadth of experience versus depth of experience. I think it completely changes the way you look at the world.
The first chapter is on the Woods versus Federer.
Woods
right?
versus Federer.
Yeah.
Right? And it's so interesting, right? It's all linked to upbringing.
Yeah.
And how you expose the kid onto what. So whether you're becoming unidimensional or multidimensional.
Correct.
Because just the fact that you become multidimensional allows you to apply so many unrelated dots. That's a huge superpower.
How's parenting been for you? I know your mom played a big role in planting your own saplings where you were planted. But talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'm sure 100% of the parents, and I think Shantanu, you'll resonate with it even more when you become a parent. But 100% of the parents will become their own parents, right? You go back to actually appreciating things that you probably didn't understand when you were younger. So I think there were 3 things which I probably took away from my mom's playbook, which is so difficult to apply, but extremely important. I think number 1, I was born a Sadarni, right? And Sikhism really thrives on service. So I used to, when I was younger, not understand why first 10 years of my life, she would take me every day to the Gurdwara and she would make me do a lot of service, like whether it's sweeping and mopping the floors or cleaning the utensils or cooking food or serving water. But Sikhism has a huge, huge imperative built on service. And I think it's a huge leveler because anytime when you serve food and you sit actually amongst everyone, it builds gratitude for all that you have.
Correct.
I think that's one important thing that I've definitely taken forward with my children. That, no matter what happens, we just have to be grateful. And that only comes with actions. And actions is linked to service.
Yeah.
So, because Sikhism fundamentally is not ritualistic. Yeah, it's a religion built on service. I think the second thing, which is so difficult to practice, but I think she did it amazingly well, was to have faith. Which is a bit like what Rahul did with his son.
Yeah.
So she would really have the faith in me to do things which would probably make her uncomfortable. She wouldn't show it.
You didn't have siblings either.
I didn't have siblings either.
It's you and her after
That's
father
it.
passed away. It's just you and her.
It's just her and me. So she really had a lot of faith in me. Like if I was doing a debate competition and for debating, if I had to go at 17 to Guwahati in a train, she would be fine.
Oh, really?
She'd be like, okay, it'll be passing through Bihar. I'll be going alone. I'll be probably bringing the trophy back in a second-class train. she would be okay.
Can you imagine doing that with
I
Sufi
don't
and
know
Zoe?
if I can do it, so that's humongous faith. And she used to always say that I know I pray so much that nothing can go wrong. And my faith in my values is stronger than anything else. But I think sometimes that faith allows you to let go.
Yeah.
Right? And that is so difficult to practice. As a mom, I can really, really now be thankful that for everything that I became is because she took a chance on me. Instead of holding me back, she actually told me, it's going to be okay. Go.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing from her playbook, which I really feel held me in good stead, was to not take life so seriously. And not to take anything like achievement, failure, material goods, or the lack of it too seriously. Just recognizing that everything is a phase and you're grateful for what you have today. But even if you don't have it tomorrow, just be grateful that you had it once. And I think just it's very difficult to practice. But I think if you imbibe some of it, it just makes your life very light.
Yeah.
You're able to forgive easily. Because I think half your relationships in life will fall in place.
Yeah.
The moment you're able to forgive yourself or others.
Yeah.
Right? Because, come on, we're all human. We're all going to make a bunch of mistakes,
Very
right?
imperfect.
We're all work in progress. But it is important to forget what happened in that day, and not carry forward that day into the next day. I think what couples tend to practice in marriage, which are considered golden, but I think it's a golden rule for life.
Yeah.
Good, bad, ugly. If the day finishes, it's over.
Yeah.
Just don't carry that baggage
To the next
day. So I think it just makes you free.
Yeah.
And makes your relationships easy and uncomplicated, makes life easy.
She seems to be an amazing person.
Yeah, she was very different from... She was a totally different person, Shantanu. She was a pre-partition parent. She had me very late. So when she passed away, she was 81. Right? We had a 45-year age difference.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. So what maybe... so probably Nitish's mom and my mom would be similar age. Because she had me at 46. Right? So... so it's a very so she was a very self-actualized parent raising a young child. So I think that was a gift for me, It's such a unique gift because it'll always stay with me. Because it's just such a unique gift, right? Because that person's grown up and seen partition. She was born in Pakistan. She lived through at 9 what that entire move felt like. She saw 1984. She saw all her family go through extreme hardship during the riots in Delhi. So she had really seen life in a way that I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Right? So I think from that lens, the world is a very different place. You only see it from the lens of gratefulness.
And Sufi and Zoe were a result of her nudge.
Yeah, man. I don't think, it's a very big price I had to pay, but I wish my mom, if you ask me ever, Shantanu, if there's any regret I have, is I just wish my mom had seen my children. There is none other. If you ask me, that's probably my only regret. Because, for the longest time, I just, it's not like I never wanted to have kids. It was always like it's not the right time. And that you never know when it's the right time. So, that's why today probably I would tell my younger self that it was such a gift. And I wish I'd experienced it even earlier. But I guess it's all written in the stars. Yeah. But I think... like my mom, unfortunately, had a really rough time. She had a brain stroke during COVID. But I think one of her parting words was to build my family. So she said, you've done well. Now just go out there and build your family. Because the way your children can love you, there is no relationship in the world that can come close to that. And they really make you selfless. Because you always have to put them ahead of you. And it truly is your heart beating outside of your body.
Yeah.
It just reprioritizes life in a way that you don't even know. Ambition, achievement, everything just takes a very different meaning, because you start living your entire life for people who still have to build theirs.
Yeah.
So it just changes your worldview in a way that nothing else in the world can.
Yeah. Again, Rahul and said, we were just hanging out a few days back.
Yeah.
Said the other founder of Dribo. He said, यार बच्चों के बाद एक चीज होती है फटती रहती है हमेशा.
All the time.
कि boss कुछ हो ना जाए.
Yeah.
Like just nothing should happen.
True.
It hit me hard. Like he's like, I'm in a state of constant paranoia and fear. I said it should not be debilitating. But he's like, no.
But it's real. Yeah, but that's also a reflection of the world we live in.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we would feel the same way in cities which perhaps were perceived safer.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many people, Shantanu, post kids choose condos?
Yeah.
choose gated communities. I think a lot of that comes from very primal need of safety
Protection.
and protection, because the kids are vulnerable
Yeah.
and you are expected to be responsible.
Yeah.
Which is why when you work with moms, it is so important to realize that, aside from all the jobs they do, they are really responsible for shaping the young kids. And, you will be surprised, Chandra, today women are choosing to have kids so late. Forget India. That was one interesting paradox I even saw in Europe. Highly accomplished women, highly educated, highly accomplished, in their 40s, not even married, only wedded to careers, right? And then you actually take a step back and say, why? And then you realize that at the heart of it, neither is the society nor the organizations are thinking deep enough on the societal consequence of these choices.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. I was in
Right?
South Korea recently. Fertility rate of 0.7.
Look at that.
You need 2.1 to maintain population.
Can you imagine?
And, couples, it's now the government has gotten involved.
Yeah.
They give you money to get married, they give you money for the first child, they give you a lot of money for the second child, etc.
Correct.
But not working.
Yeah.
At the same time, super developed, extremely unhappy country. Highest suicide rate in the world.
Correct.
For men and women both.
Unbelievable.
So now you're thinking, okay, is there a correlation here or is there a causation or is it just coincidental? And you see this across society and you realize that I think having children timely, and if you have the means medically, financially, etc., to have healthy children to grow them, I think to do it on time is important. At the same time, the other argument is humanity was 1 billion people for 60,000 years. Right, until we started crossing oceans a few hundred years back.
True.
And once we started crossing oceans from the US to, Europe to India to, China, etc., that's when we went from 500 million or billion to 8 billion in like 500 years. And you know that if it's going to be so steep, so quick, there's going to be a recorrection. So
Correct.
we don't know whether this fertility rate and these choices are a result of humanity correcting or it's a result of hedonistic independence over duty to humanity mindset that has come in richer and richer countries more recently. But frankly, like I was telling you yesterday's conversation, and you don't know what the answer is to this, right? Yesterday's conversation was eye-opening in that way that like a lot of times people don't think about it.
Yeah, that's true.
And a lot of it is very personal, right?
Yeah, true.
So
But it's also about normalizing a lot of things, Shantanu. Because I'll tell you, for any family, today not wanting to have a child is a choice that I respect, right? But if you are someone who's keen to have and build a family, it is important to realize that today it is true your biological clock is invariably in conflict with your professional career, right? But I think that's where a lot more awareness and education is needed, right? If women are highly fertile in their 30s, if you're not sure, you probably have not even met your partner. Just go out there and freeze your eggs. And today I think a lot of organizations are supportive. They are giving the money to help people freeze their eggs at a time when they are the most fertile,
Correct.
which is under 30.
25.
Right? That's
24,
actually
25.
the ideal time, right? But I think more and more conversation,
Has to
normalizing this entire space, and actually just recognizing the fact that it's just allowing you to buy time at your convenience.
Yeah.
But at least you have a choice. Otherwise, at the end of, unfortunately in your 40s, the choices just become narrower and more narrow.
The thing is, people think that education leads to informed choices. The issue is that information on this is so either false or not there.
Yeah,
That
true.
people, it's very easy to take inertia into account and not have the conversation with your
Correct.
partner for years.
For years.
Because you're in careers, you're in global roles and blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
And frankly, I think careers don't have the kind of timers that they used to.
I know.
Today we are very healthy adults till we are 75, 80. But the biological clock is what it was.
Absolutely.
You physically mature in your teens.
Correct.
And I did not know this. I found out yesterday. And Indian women a lot more. Indian women
Yeah.
hit menopause 4 years before Caucasian women.
Wow.
4 to 5 years before.
I didn't know that.
Right? And 90%, you are born with a finite number of eggs. 90% of them are born by the time you're 30. So now,
You're optimizing for that 10.
so at 25, 1 in 4 eggs is abnormal, genetically abnormal, and cannot lead to a healthy pregnancy. By 35, that number is like 1 in 10 is healthy.
Wow.
So ovarian reserve is one thing. Science of freezing and thawing is the other, which
And
is
then
where
actually having a baby.
where cryopreservation does make a big difference.
Correct.
And then how healthy is your body to carry a 9-month pregnancy to fruition?
No,
Right?
absolutely.
Because that is important too. So at 40
Yeah.
versus 25,
It's completely different.
very different.
Very different. And I'll tell you, Shantanu, see, again, that's where I would say it's an individual choice because, see, motherhood also requires you to have a certain degree of maturity.
100%.
Right? And I think a lot of times today when women are choosing to embrace motherhood a bit later is also because they're choosing to marry a bit later. And now then it all goes down to, if we were to, exactly as we were discussing, why? I mean, of course, wish you dated earlier, wish you married earlier, wish the whole cycle would have happened earlier. But today, the children that we are raising, we're also raising them to be extremely ambitious.
Yeah.
They are serious about the careers they want to build, and they would also not settle for less. They would marry when they find the right partner. Assuming you found a partner at 30 and you decided to have a child in your mid-30s, and which may be the reality for most people, right? At least at a certain affluence levels,
urban, yeah.
right? In urban India. Then, one, if you had frozen your eggs in time, you had a better choice. Second is, how do you really manage stress? And third is, I think, as today younger companies often have the argument saying we don't make enough profit to invest money in a crèche or in flexibility for women. But yeah, I think that's where all organizations and I think leaders of organizations have to take a pause and have to look at the societal consequence of the infrastructure that you're creating. Are you making it easy or tough?
Yeah.
And one of the things I used to love about HUL is people could bring in their kid at 6 months or even 3 months and leave them at a crèche and go to work. At lunchtime, the mom could come and just peep from the window and say, is my baby okay? Because there is a separation anxiety which is so real. It is just so real, right? So in that context here,
Tough
I think
है
these
यार
are choices.
बहुत tough है. Like India में एक तो, see India में, like Scandinavian countries, government provides all
Yeah,
this.
correct.
Right? It's a gold standard.
Correct.
India में government cannot because our healthcare budgets are 2% of GDP. So
Correct.
It's minuscule.
Correct.
Even though a big chunk of it goes to reproductive, maternal, neonatal, adolescent
Correct.
and child. That's where it goes.
Which
but
is
it's
why
still
you
there.
end up looking at private sector.
तो वहाँ पे नहीं है.
नहीं है.
अभी तुम किस पे डिपेंड करते हो? You depend on a joint family setup.
Which is also now.
Grandparents, chacha,
Correct.
chachi, bua, masi, this whole thing, village to raise a child,
Yeah,
like you said,
absolutely.
right? अब तुम for better opportunities तुम शहर गए हो,
Yeah.
तुम्हारा family तो कहीं और है,
Which is a very
तो
real
तुम
scenario.
शहर में भी हो, government is also not spending, so now it comes down to two people,
True.
right? Now, it's a very interesting. We can have a totally separate discussion on this, right? But,
I
it's
think
very difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult, Shantanu, but I think these are all choices, right?
But if you were to like fix two variables, which is a woman's career has to be paramount, financial independence is paramount, and a woman's health is paramount.
Yeah. Then you
You
make
cannot
choices
touch both of
differently.
these.
Correct.
Then you will find other variables to move. For example,
Yeah.
finding the right partner.
Yeah.
You should not wait till 30 to do it if you want to have a good career and
Yeah,
be a
yeah,
mom,
I agree
for
with you.
example.
I agree.
I think we should have age-appropriate dating
Conversations.
in society.
I
At
agree.
17, 18, 19 for women and men, maybe when they go to college a little
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
But age-appropriate dating discussion so that you know कि मेरे को क्या पसंद है, कौन चाहिए, कहाँ रहना है.
Correct.
Do I want to grow where I'm planted? It's
Correct,
something
correct,
that you need to
correct.
learn.
Correct.
So you don't waste. Because our education system also keeps us in college till 22, 23. If you're a
Yeah,
doctor till 30, 32.
Absolutely. That's
It's crazy.
True. It's a long time.
So you have to find other variables to move to
Correct.
keep these two
Correct.
constant. And it's something I've started really thinking hard about, which is we have to have men who can take
Who share the load, yeah.
who can take load financially and at home.
And work domestically. Yeah.
At home. And we have to find ways for women to find partners early so that their bodies are not compromised
Correct.
when they're 35, 37.
Correct. Correct.
Right? You need to be nourished, you need to have exercise, you need to not have alcohol.
Correct.
All of
These things are important.
very difficult things from a lifestyle
I agree.
standpoint. So,
I agree.
बहुत difficult. And तो it's very
And
easy for
also the third thing which I'll probably say, Shantanu, which is important for a woman's self-esteem.
Yeah.
I think it's the way we treat a returning mom's career.
I completely agree.
I have seen invariably now, with all due respect, so many times startups know because of, forget startups, even larger organizations, people are cognizant of the fact that a woman on maternity cannot be asked to go. As soon as she comes back, she's given the pink slip.
Are you serious?
That's how it's a very common practice. Or because a woman is expecting and she comes for an interview, a lot of times she's denied roles because you know that, oh, she's going to be hired and then she's going to be out of service for 9 months. Or a returning mom comes back. I mean, while you may be bound to give them equal or better role, but imagine if you brought in a returning mom and actually promoted her, because the months that she spent away, but the months that she spent on raising a family, but it's also symbolizing how much of a self-esteem or a confidence are you building for a highly competent mom, right? I mean, of course, judge people for work, for performance, but at the same time, you have to encourage families to thrive.
100%.
You know?
I think if we feel that women have to be healthy when they're having children, which means they might have children earlier than what current urban choices are, their rehabilitation in the workforce becomes societal responsibility.
You know, as
not
they
just
go
corporate.
through postpartum depression, and then if your self-esteem takes a beating when you come back, it doesn't feel good because they're anyway having massive
Very
separation
vulnerable.
anxiety. You know,
Vulnerability also high.
massive. Because imagine you're a 6-month kid is a highly dependent child, you know, and you are expected to bounce back. You know, imagine if you don't have, exactly as you mentioned, Shantanu, if you don't have an ecosystem, you are so dependent on help. You're constantly anxious because it may be a team that you've built, but you know, you are always going to be worried.
Yeah.
One part of you is constantly worried. You know, so if you actually spend time with a young mom ever in office, you'll realize every 1 hour she's probably calling home, she's checking on what's happening because she's really left a piece of her heart at home. You know, and that's when a child is most vulnerable. So safety becomes important. But I think, you know, that's where these are important conversations which families need to have. And people at work need to be sensitive.
On time.
I agree. 100%.
You know, we have young men and women watching this who are looking to you for, you know, for advice, for mentorship, and mostly for validation. You know, this generation, younger people are so, you know, they feel very unanchored and rudderless for the most part because of multiple reasons, stress, social media, FOMO, all of that, right? Any word of advice before you leave for young people who are watching, you know, kind of stars in their eyes right now?
Okay, I think, honestly, I still don't think I have earned the right to give anybody any advice. But the only thing I would probably say, I think that's probably my mother's greatest gift to me. If I look back in time, you have no idea how much I fought with her, how many mistakes I made. What a rebel I used to be, like an extreme rebel. You know, I think I must have made my mother's life miserable when she was young. You know, I mean, I used to see her following me, literally, wherever I was going. So I would only say to everybody, please just make mistakes, but just don't repeat them. You know, it is important to make mistakes. It is important to fail. It is important to realize that it's all right. Tomorrow's a new day. Because if you're going to get scared of failing or of making that mistake or of feeling less, you're never going to find yourself. And just don't let anybody make you feel less, right? Always feel more. Because the world can only be seen from two lenses, either from the lens of abundance, that I have a lot, or from the lens of scarcity. And I always genuinely I look at this glass. And, you know, I truly, truly feel it, you know. Either you see it as half full or you see it as half empty. There are people who have everything and they are the most depressed.
Yeah.
And then there are those who are living today in Bhutan who probably have one roti to eat and they're happy to tear it apart into 2 pieces and share.
Share it, yeah.
Right? So happiness is a state of mind. It does not come from how much you achieve, how materially prosperous you are. Of course, it is important to aspire for those because a hungry stomach is going to be a miserable period.
Yeah.
But a lot of it also comes from just being zen with who you are. And it's okay if there are people who may like you, may not like you, may understand you, may not understand you, but every one of us is on a journey. But just don't hesitate to make a mistake. And don't let anybody make you feel less. You know, that's the most important.
Okay. Being a full-time influencer is a lucrative career opportunity.
Well, if it makes money, then highly sensible. If it doesn't make money, then...
But will it make money? Like, for example, for a 21-year-old getting out of college with a good job at, let's say, HUL.
Yeah, but you know, I actually think a lot of the younger crowd is super sensible to do this as a passion and monetize it. Many of them actually have dual careers.
You think they'll monetize it and be able to...
Yeah, if they're able to do it, I think they're highly sensible.
Got
But
it.
if they make it the soulless career, then you just have to genuinely be mindful of longevity.
Got it.
You know?
Yeah.
That's all.
Understood. As a fresher, I want to start my career at a startup.
Honest answer?
Of course.
I would say just go out there and first put your head down and learn.
Yes.
And learn fundamentals. Because if you don't know what's the right playbook, you may be very, very agile and useful, but it is important to go down and learn first.
Absolutely.
So, my honest view.
I agree.
Yeah.
My 5 years at McKinsey, similar
You
to
are,
what HUL,
absolutely.
right? So I'm a product of
Yeah.
process,
Correct.
thinking, analytics, systemic thinking,
And
etc.
we over glorify speed in startups. And it's like sometimes it's okay to take a day, think and do the right thing
Yeah.
instead of just throwing all the darts in and say, okay, let's see what will survive because I was the fastest.
Yeah.
So that I'm not sure I'm in the camp of.
Yeah. I use social media as my source of news.
I'm also guilty, yeah. And half the times I'm quoting Instagram and then I'm like really embarrassed. But I think it's happening to all of us.
Not that?
No, yeah, I think that's now becoming the new version of truth.
Yeah.
Because it's so ubiquitous. How do you avoid it? I mean, so many times the only news you've seen is what you've seen on
Social.
Instagram. Or,
I think social makes you aware.
Yeah.
I think social is bad at detail orientation.
Also, sometimes in the way facts are presented.
Yeah.
Because that narrative is not always neutral.
Correct.
It is a point of view.
Correct.
And not a statement of facts.
Correct. Correct.
So, but we're all guilty, yeah. Equally me.
Yeah, absolutely. New product growth or acquisitive growth?
Always grow the core and then build on top.
Got it. Grow the core, build on. I love the Lakme model.
Yeah, man.
Build equity on top, let it
really
refresh the
flows.
core, and then you build.
And it really works, yeah. Genuinely. Your equity will come from the top. May not always be the most volume driving business.
Oftentimes.
And half the time, reasons why your NPDs die is because people judge it by the wrong metric.
Automotive में तो यही है ना.
वही तो.
Look at Mercedes portfolio.
बिल्कुल वही है.
जो बिकता है versus जो equity create करता है बहुत ही अलग.
But यार अगर वो equity नहीं बने तो नीचे बिकेगा
नहीं
नहीं.
बिकेगा.
बिकेगा ही नहीं.
80 लाख की गाड़ी है.
Of course. And that's the nano.
Base model is 80 lakhs.
Yeah.
So you can't do that, right?
But people go to the auto shows to look at the latest Maybach.
Correct.
Right?
And Maybach creates the.
Aspiration. बिल्कुल.
बहुत सीखा मैंने आपसे आज.
Sadhru,
Thank
बहुत
you
मजा
so-
आया. This
thank you
turned
so-
out to be way better than my expectation.
Really?
Like
What was
way
your
better.
expectation?
I thought we would be doing a lot of work talk or
Business.
business talk, and I think this turned out to be so much fun.
Yeah. I think thanks to you. Thank you so much
No,
for
but
being
yeah, I think you made
honest
me
and authentic.